Welcome to Gift of Life, the Organ Transplant podcast. These are the stories of those who have received, given, and who are waiting for the gift of life, organ transplantation. Now here's your host and heart and kidney recipient, BJ Odom.
Welcome to Gift of Life, the Organ Transplant Podcast, a place where we journey through the incredible world of organ transplantation. I'm your host, BJ Odom. Each week we uncover inspiring stories, we meet extraordinary people, and of course we connect to the world of transplants. Remember to support us by leaving that 5-star review and subscribing wherever you get your podcast. And don't forget to join us on Facebook, Gift of Life, the Organ Transplant Podcast. And of course, as always, if you have a story and you would like to tell us about it, just send us an email, giftoflifepodcast@gmail.com. In this, episode 21, we are joined by Peggy Lindsay, a remarkable heart transplant survivor and the author of the inspiring book, My Beat Goes On. Peggy's journey to, properly be diagnosed spanned for over 4 years, challenging ups and downs. Well, today, she's with us to talk about her book and her transplant. But first of all, Peggy, tell us just a little bit about yourself.
I'm a heart transplant recipient. I've received my heart about 1.5 years ago. And all I know about my donor is that it was a 30-year-old female. So I'm very blessed. I call her Gia. To just refer to her as my donor kind of seems so insignificant. So my mother was Italian, and in Italian, the name Gia means gracious gifts or God's gifts. So I thought, well, that's the perfect name. So just very grateful, very blessed. And this kind of all started because my first cardiology team failed me. They failed to diagnose my problem. So 11 years ago, I went into 3rd-degree heart block out of nowhere and received my first pacemaker. And I kept saying, well, I know what the heart block is, but I don't know the why. Why did this happen? And nobody could tell me. So I kept my cardiology appointments all those years. And, I was a compliant patient. Did my doctor's appointments every 3 months or so. And about 4 years ago, I noticed that I was really short on breath. I couldn't go like 30 feet without gasping for air. And at that point, I was still working full time. And I was a caregiver. So I'm like, well, this isn't good. I'm supposed to be taking care of people. And here I am needing the care. So I went to my doctor and I said, something's not right. Well, we'll do an echocardiogram. It comes back. And I'm told, the right side of your heart is a little bit larger than the other side. But it's no big deal. It's just the right side. We'll just keep an eye on it. So the year goes by. I'm still getting out of breath. They do another echo. I'm told the same thing. Well, in 2021, I went to see that doctor and I said, I want my echo pushed up. It was scheduled for April of the following year and I wanted it moved up to the holidays. And I said, there's something really wrong. Something is not right. And the doctor said to me, well, when did you get MD added to your name?
Oh, wow.
And I was like, excuse me? So I said, well, my daughter and I have concerns for heart failure, especially based on my family history. And the doctor said, well, what are her credentials? I was like, this isn't happening, right? I mean, this is the person I'm supposed to be putting all my trust in. And I said, well, my daughter's a PA up at Penn Medicine. And she's very concerned for heart failure. Well, did she just graduate? And at that point, I was like about to lose it. And I said, no, she's been a PA as long as you've been a doctor. And I I trust her opinion way more than I do yours at this point. So I got up and I left. And she ended up doing the echo. And she said, if there's anything out of the norm, my office will call you. I'll be on vacation for the holidays for 2 weeks.
Now, this was your daughter?
2 weeks goes by. No, this is my doctor, my cardiologist at the time. You know, she said, if anything's wrong, well, my office will call you and let you know. I never heard anything. So I decided I'm going to go into my patient portal, which I'm a huge advocate for that now, because I went back those 4 years and I looked at my echocardiogram results, and it said, the first one said that the right ventricular function was mildly reduced. And then I went to the second year and it said that it was moderately reduced. So it went from mild to moderate. And I'm thinking, why weren't we having a conversation about this? And it was just, oh, you're fine. It's just the right side. No big deal. I looked at year 3. It still said moderately reduced. And then the one that I pushed her to get moved up, the results were severely reduced.
And still no call, right?
No one had, and still no call, still nothing. Excuse me. And I was just outraged and in shock. And I called my daughter. I said, do me a favor. Here's the info to get into my portal. Take a look at it and tell me if you're seeing what I'm seeing. Because if that's the case, I'm in big trouble. And my daughter, Lindsay, she looked into it. She called me back. She said, what is she talking about? It's no big deal. It's just the right side. You're in end stage heart failure. And I was like, no, that can't be, because the cardiologist kept saying it was pulmonology, and pulmonology did all their tests, and they said, no, we're telling you like you were our family member. It is not a pulmonology issue. It's a heart issue. And my doctor and I still never had a conversation. So that January of 2022, I think it was 2021, I ended up going into the ER because I was having chest pains and having, hard times breathing. And I knew my pulmonologist was going to be there. So his office said, well, he's there due to COVID. If your oxygen gets below 90, we want you to go in and ask for him. And so I went in there and, they said, cardiology said, well, we can't find anything wrong. And I said, well, I would like a consultation with my pulmonologist. He's here. He's working. I know he's here. And so I never saw him. They supposedly consulted with another pulmonologist. And this was January of 2022. And they ended up, to my knowledge, they didn't consult a pulmonologist and sent me home. We couldn't find anything wrong.
Oh, wow. Now, let me ask you this also, because
yeah,
I wonder about this sometimes. Now, was this at a smaller hospital or a pretty good-sized facility?
Huge hospital in Clearwater, known for their cardiac program. So,
it's really weird. I think nowadays some of these doctors get so busy and so many things go through the cracks, which should never happen. But I think what it is, if you don't really watch for yourself and know what's going on, you've got to act. Which is not really a small town. I lived in Fort Myers, and after I had my transplant, I had a great cardiologist though that was on it. I'd been, had heart problems since birth. And he said, someday you're going to need a heart transplant, but not now. And when the time came, He immediately, said, you need to get to Tampa. it's time to start talking about a heart transplant. And I want to send you up there to talk to, some cardiologists that deal with transplants. And so, it all worked out positively for me, but I've talked to other people and it seems like, in small, so anymore, when I lived in Fort Myers and now I live in Clearwater, if I get sick, I tell my wife, unless I'm going to die in the next, 45 minutes, just get my butt to Tampa.
Get my butt to Tampa. Yeah, exactly.
That's so,
exactly.
But I don't know if it's smaller hospitals or just sometimes they're just, and I know there's some bum doctors out there.
Yeah. I mean, I understand the medical system is really stretched to the thinnest and there's a lot of burnout. But if you're going to be in it, you need to be in it wholeheartedly. Pardon the expression.
Yeah.
But, I was being treated like put a check mark in the box and on to the next. And when I stood up, then I got the sarcasm and the snarkiness. And it's like, there's no reason for that. I know my body better than anybody else.
And I have learned that over the years also. I've been in, like I said, I've been in smaller hospitals where something was wrong and I went there first and they kind of gave some recommendations and I already knew no, that's that when I take that medicine, my blood pressure actually goes up, not down. Oh no, but this is what you need.
Right.
No, I've done this before and they gave me the medicine and my blood pressure goes up. And so I said, told you. So like I said, usually unless, I think I'm going to be dead within the next, because I'm about 45 minutes from Tampa General from where I am, I always say. Unless you think I'm going to die in the next 45 minutes, you get me to Tampa General.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
But I have talked to other people on this podcast, not only with hearts, but also someone who is in kidney failure. And the doctor was kind of the same way, almost identical to your story. She's going, something's not right. And he says to her, well, you have a medical degree? But she went to find out
exactly
she was in kidney failure, like she knew something critically was wrong with her. But it took another doctor to basically, at another hospital to figure out. And they even said, oh my God, this has probably been going on for the last, 6 months or more. And, they just misdiagnosed.
Yeah. And I'm a huge advocate that people have to, be their own advocate. If you don't know how to get into your patient portal, learn.
Yeah.
Don't just hand it to somebody else and say, well, here, do it, and you look, I don't care if you're, 20 or 100. If you have a computer or you have a smartphone, you need to learn how to get into your patient portal. It's that important. And whenever you have a test done, you go in and you look and you see, because sometimes there's stuff there that they're not telling you about. And it had this happen, had I done that 4 years sooner, I could have slowed this progression down. I could have gone to, another specialist or, over to whatever the case, and had someone be treating me at that point before I was in end stage heart failure. So that's a huge, if anybody takes anything away from this podcast, be your own advocate, learn how to get into your patient portal, and take a lot of notes.
Now that is my wife. When I got my transplant, I'm one of those people you need a transplant. Like I said, I've been sick, since I was a baby. So I think I'm used to it. It's like, oh, you need a transplant. Oh, okay. I'll just, whatever we need to do, let's do. But she was taking notes the entire time. She had a whole notebook done by the time it was over. And I'm just like, well, if you got to do it, let's just go do it. But like I said, I got
Yeah.
to the right people, so I feel very fortunate. Even the doctor, the cardiologist that I had in Fort Myers, they watched me very closely, and they knew when it was time. And their timing was almost perfect, because when I got there and they go, oh yeah, your doctor was right. You're going to need, a new heart, and we need to get started on the process now. As you went through it too, there's a lot of testing. I always joke about this. There's even psychic evaluations. Now,
Yeah.
now I don't know if they had to do this with your wife or not, but they actually, I don't know if that because she's my caretaker or whatever, but they actually had to interview her, and they say, hey, does this guy have any psychic issues we should know about, and all these other questions? And I was a little nervous. My wife's going to go in there and start. She might say, yeah, we could. Let's just get rid of him. But no. I mean, I'm just kidding. But yeah, you go through a lot of psychological and a lot of medical tests, as you well know.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because
well, so that's kind of when it started. Was once I got over to Tampa General, then they started diving in deeper, more so than any doctor had done in the last 10 years. So yeah, notes are huge. Notes are huge.
And I really think, and I know they're great doctors in some small locations, but my family is originally from a very small town. And, when they're sick, they're going, oh, we went to the local hospital. I'm going, oh my God, just get them out of there. But like I said, I know they have, a lot of these small hospitals have excellent doctors, but there's a lot of them that, don't know the very best care and the very best techniques. And so sometimes you just need to go, well, let me, I may live here, but let me try to go maybe to a little bit bigger city, or, let me get some different ears and eyes on this situation.
Exactly. And sometimes you can find a great doctor in a small hospital, but that hospital's not equipped for the plan of treatment you're going to need.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to name the city or the hospital, but somebody needed an MRI who went to a particular hospital, and they said, well, we only have the truck come once a month, so we're going to have to send you to this other hospital so we can get the MRI you're going to need. So we're going to have to transfer you. But that's small town living though. So no way to getting around it if you live in a small town. But how are you doing nowadays? Then you finally got to Tampa, and they said you're gonna need a heart transplant.
Well, not immediately. I mean, I got over to Tampa in February of 22, and they scheduled a heart catheterization. And I was surprised because the doctor that I met with in the office was the doctor doing the actual heart cath, which surprised me because they didn't outsource it to somebody else. And the procedure was wasn't even half over. And the doctor came around and kind of squatted down to, look at me eye to eye. And she said, Peggy, I'm going to go ahead and admit you. You're in cardiogenic shock, which is life-threatening. And she knew the story about how I was treated at my other cardiologist. So I said, yeah, it's a good thing. It's just the right side and no big deal. Right, Doc? we both kind of chuckled about it. But long story short, she admitted me, and I was in for 2 weeks. Now, mind you, the month before I was at this other hospital system and everything was fine. They sent me home. So 2 weeks in, and they left, when I left, they had a double port put in my chest, and I was on 24/7 IV medication and had to have a home healthcare nurse come to the hospital, hook up the portable machine so that I could go home. And then a nurse would come once a week to change out all the dressings. And meanwhile, I would change the tubing and everything daily. So I got really good at that. And I was on that for a little over a year, and they were trying to buy me some time before we had to resort to a transplant.
Okay.
So the word transplant came up, but it wasn't like you need one now. It was you might be needing one in your future. And my outlook was, oh no, I'm not going to go through that. That's way too much pain for me to even think about. And I wish that I had someone that I knew that had been through it, that I could ask the questions to. And, we had joked about it that, I think I had met you in the waiting room, and I think you were that guy that I talked to that answered questions. And I said, you know what? Okay, I'm going to change my mind about this should it come up. And I'm going to use this experience and be a mentor for people that have to get one and let them know what they went through. And so, when I looked for information, I couldn't find anything written from a heart transplant patient. I saw bypass surgeries, kidney and liver transplants. And I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to kind of journal this journey and use this as a teaching tool for those that need one down the road.
Yeah, because we're going to talk about that. You actually wrote a book. It's called My Beat Goes On. Almost sounds like a Sonny and Cher song there. My Beat Goes On, which is all about it. And I want to get to that book in just a minute, but we're going to kind of, continue through with your journey. And like you said, and I don't know if it was me or not, because we talked, a couple of days ago about you being on the podcast, and it almost sounds like it was me, because they was always asking me, hey, such and such needs a transplant. Could you go talk to them? And if I'm at the hospital or I'm around the hospital, I'm like you. Heck yeah, let me talk to them. And I think your experience was the same experience as mine when I first found out I had to have a heart transplant. I'm going, oh my God, I have to have a heart transplant. This is like, I don't know, this is like the craziest thing I've ever heard. And then I went to the support group. For me, it was a support group where I met my first person who had a heart transplant. And then I said, hey, can you come on my radio show? Because I did a radio show back then. And, like the first thing I said, you had a heart transplant? And now when I talk to people, they say the same thing to me. What? You had a heart transplant? You look fine. Mm-hmm. You look normal. I go, well, yeah, that's why I had the surgery.
Exactly. But you know what? If I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't have hesitated. I would not have hesitated, because my biggest fear was the pain. And I will tell you this, my pain level didn't get over a 2.5. Where is it on the scale of 1 to 10? Well, mine was consistently like a 2.5. And I attribute that to taking the medications. That's not the time to be the hero and try to do things without pain medication. And so, they give you your heavy duty stuff at like 12, and then another 6 hours at 6 o'clock. And there's that time in between that's when you ask for that breakthrough medication, because that's really what keeps you ahead of the pain. And as I said, if I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't have hesitated, knowing that those options are available to you. There's so many different medications out there that, it's really...
Now,
it wasn't bad.
I'm guessing it was like 2 or 3 years, might even been a little bit more, but I think it was like 2 or 3 years before they actually said you need to start. Well, they might have even been saying I need to start talking about a transplant then, but also I had some major blockage, and they said you're going to need bypass surgery before we even talked about, the heart transplant. And I will tell you right now that the bypass surgery for me was 10 times worse than the heart transplant ever was. And in fact, they lost me on the table, and thank God they brought me back. But I was in pain. It took me a long time to recoup. And the heart transplant was like, I woke up the next, that morning going, I'm good. I'm ready to
Yeah,
party.
exactly.
I'm ready. I don't know if it's the prednisone they give you, but boy, I was wired morning one. I even called my old morning radio show partner because, we were still doing a show back then. And he put me on the air that morning. I said, I'm ready to go on the air. Come on, get me on. Let's talk about this thing.
Yeah, it's crazy how that happens. But yeah, you just had that huge burst of energy because you just felt like, garbage for so many years. And same thing. I mean, my mind was running a million miles a minute and everybody's like, okay, slow down now. I know you're eager to get going on this, but you gotta take your time. I mean, I was already planning how I was going to help the next transplant patient, and it hadn't even been 24 hours. So yeah.
Yeah, like I said, I don't know if it's the prednisone or if it's just, like I said, you also sick for a long time. I was also sick for a long time, actually, since birth. And as far as I remember, after my heart transplant, I felt better than I think I had my entire life because I had that more energy and I had that blood flow that just never 100% seemed to be there before that. So, yeah, it was... For me,
same exact thing with me.
It was an easy peasy operation for me. In fact, also because of the meds, unfortunately, not to scare you, because not everybody needs to do this, because some people have great kidneys and never have to worry about this through their whole heart transplant. But I then had to get a kidney transplant. And I would also say my kidney transplant was harder on me than my heart transplant.
Mm. Wow.
But I was older
I've heard,
too.
Medications can do that. They help one organ, but damage another.
Yep. So how are you doing nowadays?
So I'm doing great. Yesterday I went on a 10-mile bike ride. I'm doing 100 miles in the month of September to raise money for the American Heart Association. So everybody's like, are you kidding me? 100 miles? And
hey, I've had a heart transplant. I've even had a heart transplant myself, and I'm saying 100 miles? Is this woman crazy?
Yeah. Well, not all in one shot. I will say that. But yeah, so yesterday I went out and did 10 miles towards it. So I'm 55 miles in and 45 left to go.
All right. Well, congratulations to you on that.
Not even halfway through the month. Yeah. Thank you.
Now, because of this whole ordeal, and I wish I would have done, everybody always tells me, you need to write, because like I said, been sick, since I was a kid, had my first open heart surgery at 22 months old. I had another one when I was like 14 years old in 1968, had the bypass surgery before I had the transplant. I could write a book, let me tell you, but you wrote a book. It's called My Beat Goes On. And what enticed that, or how did you put it together?
Well, again, when the word transplant came up, I went looking for information directly from a patient standpoint. Again, my biggest fear was the pain. So I wanted to know, well, what kind of pain am I going to be looking at? And I couldn't find anything. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to keep notes and I'm going to write about this whole thing. It was my therapy. I'm going to turn something negative into a positive, and I'm going to be an educator, so to speak. And if one person reads the book that they found helpful, then it was worth the entire thing for me. So, I made sure that there's a lot of titles out there. My Beat Goes On, but I subtitled it Chronicles of a Heart Transplant Patient. So people knew that, it was kind of like a step by step, and one of the steps in there was the testing for it. And, that takes about 6 months. They do so many different tests. I mean, I didn't even know they had blood pressure cups small enough to fit on your big toes. Because, they wanted to check your blood flow into your feet. And, in your case, you said you needed the bypass before. I didn't have any blockages. So, it went right from, okay, now everything is kind of taken a turn for the worse. And now we have to talk transplant or hospice?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, well, I think I've made up my mind. So transplant it is. And I was in the hospital, so they had a captive audience, and they just started the testing right away. And, so it was a good time to make some notes. And it took from September of 22 until February of 23 to complete all the testing. So they look at everything. They look on the molecular level, your antibodies, all of that, your blood type, and all of that goes into that central system that matches you with a donor. So they don't just, Tampa General doesn't just pick it out of the air. Oh, here we have somebody it's carefully been measured and calculated, and okay, this is a match for you. And I count my blessings because I was only listed for 37 days, BJ. That's it. And I have one of the rarest blood types there is.
Awesome. Now, see, I'm thinking you're probably kind of maybe close to me because I wasn't on the list that long after I did get on the list. But when I once got on the list, and maybe they did this with you too, I had insurance, but they would put me in the hospital for like 10 days. And I would have a swan in me. I had the drip all the time. Even when I was at home, I had the drip like you did, where you had the little bag that you had to carry around with you all the time. But they said, when you're in the hospital, we've got you on the swan, which basically helps your heart beat too, and all the meds and all the IVs, you're like on a top status. So they'd keep me in for 10 days, send me home for 5, and then have me right back in the hospital for 10 more days. And I think it was my 3rd or 4th bout of being in the hospital for the 10 days. And it was my day to leave when they got the call. And wow. That's how it worked out for me, which was a very blessing. Because like I said, I would have been going home sometime that afternoon, but nope. It was the next day because they came in in the middle of the night and said, we found your heart. We'll be doing this in the morning. And so I had to call the wife. She had to drive all the way up from Fort Myers and bring the family. But yeah, it's it was the day to release me. And, the call came in that overnight hour.
Wow. That's incredible. I was fortunate from the time that I was hospitalized in September of 2022. I did not go in the hospital again before my transplant. So I stayed at a level 4.
Well, that was good then.
And it just, you can't, I don't believe in coincidence. I truly believe this was divine intervention. I have no other explanation for it.
Now, I did hear you on another podcast, and I think this is remarkable because, you found out you got your, they found you a heart, and once the operation was over, or maybe, but they pretty much kind of told me the same thing. This heart was made for you. And I'll ask you if you had this experience or not. Well, I didn't experience, but I've been told about it. So it had to be fresh. Had to be from the Tampa Bay area. I know they were on life support, I was told, and they were taken off. But as I hear it, when they put the heart in and they let the little clamps go, they usually have to give it a little shock. Mine, they let the clamps go, and it started beating on its own. And they said, too, they go, this heart was made for you. We let go of the clamps. Normally, we have to give it a little shock, and then, it's good to go. But as soon as we took the clamps off, yours started beating on its own.
Yeah, pretty much the same thing. The doctor said not only was this a perfect heart, but it was the perfect heart for you. It's like you two were meant for each other.
That's exactly what they told me. And I've went now for over 20 years. So you and I, we can go for the record. That's what I always say. I'm going for the record. I'm going to be the longest one. And then I've had people that had their transplants after me, and they go, and after you break the record, I'm going to break it after you.
Hey, nothing wrong with friendly competition. Yeah. It's
So,
just, I mean, it's incredible how everything just aligned so perfectly. And I mean, I was talking to someone today. I had an appointment, and they have a friend of their son is in the hospital and has been in the hospital for 5 weeks, 19 years old, waiting for his heart. And, I mean, I hear the stories of people that have waited, years. And I thought, well, how blessed are we that, mine was 37 days.
Yeah, another, this was many, many years ago, probably, maybe over 40, maybe even, 45, I don't know. It was a long time ago. One of my first radio jobs in Fort Myers was at WINK. And the guy who hired me, Ben Sensing, had a bad heart and was on the transplant list. And they were actually, they were new back then, and they were sending him out to UCLA Hospital Medical Center to get his. Unfortunately, he didn't make it to the day that he received a transplant, but that was actually my first awareness of anyone who ever needed or the talk of a heart transplant. And then I thought it was amazing, maybe 20 years after, here I am getting a heart transplant. And I think of him like every day. And he was one of the unfortunates that, didn't make it to the day where he got the call.
And that's one of the things I mentioned in the book is, I mean, all that stuff goes through your mind. Okay. Is this my last holiday with my family? You look at the trees and they seem so much greener. The sky seems bluer. And then you just hope and pray that you're going to make it through that process to get to the surgery. And, for every person that you hear of, there's so many that don't. And it's just incredible. So, I mean, again, you just have to think that was divine intervention.
Now, you mentioned this earlier, which I think is, it's just a great story. And I wish I would have thought of it, because maybe I need to now. As you said in the beginning of the podcast too, you actually named did you name your heart, or did you name your donor, or is it kind of a combined thing?
It's kind of a combined thing, because all I know about my donor, 30-year-old female, that's it. And I've written in my letter to let the family know that I would love to meet them if and when they're ever ready. But to just keep referring to her as my donor heart, I just, she's now a part of me. And, I keep her family in my prayers every day. I don't know. Did she have a family? Did she have kids? Were her parents alive to see this tragedy happen to her? So yeah, I mean, it's now when people see me, they say, well, how's Gia? And I'm like, we're great. We're having a good time together. So, she has a name. She is well respected and well loved and cherished. I think she was a clean eater, BJ. Yeah, I never used to like salads, but now I do. I'd have my 1 cup of coffee a day. I don't drink coffee anymore. I don't like the taste of it. I don't drink soda. I used to hate orange sherbet. Now I love it. Yeah.
My story is.
Did you take on any personalities?
You know what? The jury is still out, and I may not know until, the day I pass on and we learn all the information we need to learn. But I had mine in 2003. That was the year the Tampa Bay Buccaneers won the Super Bowl. One of the years, because Tom Brady did it later in life. And I was never, ever a football fan. I would watch professional wrestling. I'll admit it, people. I would watch professional wrestling all the time. but never watched football. Wasn't even interested in football. Now, the nurses were wearing jerseys, while I was in and out of the hospital because Super Bowl was going on, even though I got mine in March. But before that, I was in the hospital a lot. They all had their little Super Bowl outfits on, and, even the nurses and some of the doctors would be wearing jerseys. And, everybody wanted, so everybody in the rooms usually had the game on if the nurses had come in. And after my transplant, I became like the biggest Tampa Bay fan in the world. Now, was my donor a Tampa Bay fan and not a wrestling fan? Because I hardly ever watch wrestling at all anymore. But you make it a Sunday where the where the Bucks are on, I'm in front of a TV. It's and I didn't like college football. Now, I watch a lot of college football. So I still don't have a full jury out on that, but I think you must have loved football.
Yeah, that's very possible. Very possible. I mean, how the doctor explained it to me was, when they put the heart in, they kept the back wall of my heart.
They have something to sew it onto. Yes.
Yes. And so now they put the new heart in place, and the back wall keeps it in place. And so the two are basically merged. I mean, that whole concept of cellular memory just fascinates me, because now you're literally bonded together. So it seems only natural that you're going to take on some traits of your donor.
And they say it does happen more with hearts than anything else. Another quick story. Yeah. I had a donor family, a donor mother on not long ago. One of the wildest stories I ever heard, that she actually met her donor. I mean, the recipient that had her son's heart. Mm-hmm. It was very moving when she talked about how she felt as she heard the heart beating inside this person. But the story that got me the most was she took her daughter, which, her daughter is a grown-up also, so they were both adults. And why this happened, no one would ever know why it happened. Even the recipient said, I don't know why I did that. But as they were leaving, there was some leaves outside. He grabbed the leaves off the ground, threw them at the sister, and just like all of a sudden said, I'm sorry. I have no idea the reason why I did that. And they both started crying. And I hope I don't get choked up. But he used to do that to his sister.
Oh, wow.
Explain that to me.
Yeah.
That is unreal.
That cellular memory thing.
Yeah, that's unreal.
Yeah. I mean, it just, right after my surgery, I mean, immediately as they were wheeling me into recovery, the first thing, as I'm kind of coming to, the first thought was, I'm alive.
I think, it's funny. I'm always kind of like, it's really weird. All the surgeries I've ever had in my life, I'm always kind of feeling for the stitches. Oh yeah. Okay. There they are. I'm alive. I'm awake.
I'm alive. But yeah, I mean, as they were wheeling me down the hallway, I remember very vividly, it was like I was passing through a train tunnel, something like on the Twilight Zone. I was passing through this train tunnel at about 200 miles an hour. And instead of seeing, the lights inside the tunnel that are like kind of flying towards you, it was beating hearts. Wow. Like I was going through this tunnel with beating hearts just shooting at me. And it was terrifying. And then in another second, I remember seeing a vision very clearly of a young lady, shoulder length hair, kind of light brownish, blondish, like a long, slender nose and very thin lips. And then I was like, is that my donor? So I don't know anything about my donor. So I kind of I took these notes because in the event that I do get to meet her family, it would be interesting to see what she looked like.
Wow. Great
But
story.
I remember that vividly. And yeah, it just, like I said, so then that's when I kind of, when I started liking more things that I never used to, then I'm like, okay, I need to research this. And one of the nurses at Tampa said, well, there is something called cellular memory. And, my wife had told me that as well. And so I just started doing some research on it. And it only seems natural because, as I said, you've got your heart wall there supporting the new heart and they are joined together.
Now, I have been told too, and it seems like, of all the transplants, heart seems to be the one that for some reason is more connected like that. They're the people that have like maybe, habits or, cravings that the donor had. And it seems like in the research they have done, hearts is like the number one, donor that kind of, like you say, comes together.
Mm-hmm. Thinking about the donor family, it's like and it's not to downplay like a kidney transplant or liver transplant by any means. But it's not like you can put the stethoscope on it and hear it.
Right.
So I said that I would love to give the family the gift of listening to their loved one's life going on.
Now, the longer that I've done this
And
podcast, I used to think, I don't know if I'd really want, I've sent my thank you letters and everything else because my kidney was also a deceased donor, unfortunately. But, I've sent all the letters and thank yous, and those are always hard letters to write. But in the beginning, I really didn't want to. But after I've talked to a few donor families and finding out what that means to them, now I'm more on board than, ever before for sure.
And it's important to mention too that, the family has to be open. So, you have, and I don't know if I'm saying this right, UNOS, UNOS, the middle guy. So, when we write our letters as recipients, it goes to our coordinators and they send it into this organization. But the donor family has to also write in and say that they're wanting any correspondence or they'd like to meet any of the recipients in person. Because if both don't agree to it, it won't happen.
Yes.
And the donor families also have a coordinator. And, so the donor's family may be notified and they may say, you know what, we'd love to meet them. Or they may say, absolutely not. We just want to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
They can also say, yes, we'd like to hear from them, but we need more time. So I think it's important to say this to any of those considering donations on behalf of family members. Write that letter because you go through that grief process and sometimes you forget that option's available and you think you're just going to get the letters from the recipients. But unless the donor's family writes in and says they want to know something, they won't. And that actually happened to a friend of mine. He didn't realize he was supposed to write in. And so he never heard where his daughter's organs went to. And so I've kind of, taken him under my wing to let him experience this whole process from the recipient side. So, he's fascinated by it, but he didn't realize he was supposed to write a letter. And So it's just something worth mentioning.
And the hardest letter I ever wrote to both of them. It's like,
Yes.
you want to tell and now I think I would feel better too, again, after doing this podcast and talking to some donor families, because I discussed that with them. You don't want to say, I'm doing great, I'm doing wonderful, thank you so much, and I didn't, and maybe I should have, because that would make them feel better. But I was always thinking, well, I don't want to tell them I'm doing so great because they lost a loved one.
But on the other hand, too, they want to know that gift wasn't in vain either, So, I mean, how do the words thank you even cover the gratitude for that precious gift of life that they gave us?
No kidding. I know it's about time for me to let you go, but a couple of things before I do. Let's talk about that book again. My Beat Goes On. And how can people get that book? Maybe you've never had a transplant. Maybe you've never thought about, but I think it would be a worthwhile book for anyone to read. So again, My Beat Goes On.
Absolutely.
And that is by Peggy Lindsay. And if you would, tell them how to get it.
Sure. It's available on Amazon, both in paperback and ebook. And if you're a member of Kindle Unlimited, it is free. But this book is for anybody, not just those that potentially have a transplant in their future. But I purposely wrote this book in 3 sections. So the first section is my story and what I encountered, so that, people know what to look out for and when it's time to find another doctor. The second part of the book are resources and, different apps that I found helpful. I don't have a financial interest in any of the apps that I mentioned, just what works for me. And, you have to keep your vitals every day. And so there were some great apps that put it in my cell phone. And when I go to the transplant clinic, my coordinator, Mary, can say, well, how's your blood pressure been? Well, here's the reports. So it's just some helpful resources and links. The third section is like a note section. My next doctor's appointment is on such and such a date. What questions do I have for my doctors or my nurses? What are the answers that I received? Because you had your wife taking notes. Some people, they're just so overwhelmed by what they're being told. It's going in one ear and out the other, and they rely on that other set of ears to tell them what happened.
That's me.
So, that you can make copies of and keep that. And your doctor's phone numbers and how do you get into your patient portal? There's also a journaling section for, your pre-transplant notes and your post-transplant notes. How was I before? What am I feeling after? And, I recommend doing it, every month for a while. And so it's a good book that kind of use it like a workbook. So it's good for any patient that sees doctors on a regular basis. And it doesn't matter, if you're going to get a transplant, then even better, but it doesn't necessarily, it's not geared specifically for heart transplant, although I do make a lot of mention of that. So yeah, it is available on Amazon.com, and it's available in 9 countries. So if you find the book helpful, you can send the link to somebody in their country and they can get it. And so yeah, that's my story.
Well, and again, it's called My Beat Goes On.
I'm sticking to it.
My Beat Goes On by Peggy Lindsay. It's a must read, no matter what your conditions are. I think you could learn a lot from that. And I think, just having you on the podcast and hearing your story is also, taught me a few things too today. So I do appreciate that.
Wonderful. I even have an email address in there for people to, if they've read the book and they want to, give me some things that I might have overlooked. So
go for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And even anybody hearing the podcast, if they want to reach out because they have questions, they can email me at PeggyLindsayAuthor. That's PEGGY, and then LINDSAY, author at gmail.com. And I'll be happy to answer any questions that they may have.
And we'll put that in the show notes also for people to.
Perfect. I'm all about paying it forward, BJ, and empowering and educating and mentoring, and also, a portion of the proceeds of the book, along with my art, are going back at the end of the year to Tampa General for their funds to help people that might not be able to afford some medications or whatever the case may be. So I want to let people know that too, that just simply by buying the book, you're helping someone that needs a little bit of financial assistance as well.
And hats off to you for doing that also. So before we let you go, any last words or comments or anything you'd like to tell the listeners out there?
Just be your own patient advocate. If you have to, get a second opinion, get a third opinion. If you're not feeling good and there's something wrong, just keep going, keep exploring until you find a doctor that's going to listen to you, because my doctors and my care team and everybody at Tampa General, I can't thank them enough. I mean, from the doctors, the nurses, the aides, right down to the janitor. I had a guy that would come up every day to clean my room and pray with me. And if you're in the Tampa area, that's the place you want to go, Tampa General. And, big shout out to all the people at Harborside Medical, and love to them all.
Thank you again, Peggy, for sharing your story with us today on Gift of Life, the Organ Transplant Podcast. Of course, you can pick up Peggy's book wherever you'd like. The name of the book again is My Beat Goes On by Peggy Lindsay. So please pick it up if you would. And if you'd like to talk to her about the book or any questions, feel free to send her an email. Her email is PeggyLindsayAuthor at gmail.com. Again, that's PeggyLindsayAuthor at gmail.com. Join us next week for another touching episode of Gift of Life, the Organ Transplant Podcast. And if you have a transplant story that you'd like to share with us, please reach out. It's giftoflifepodcast at gmail.com. You can follow us on Facebook, Gift of Life, the Organ Transplant Podcast. Until next time, I'm BJ Odom. Thank you so much for being a part of our journey and reminding us all to appreciate each and every day and cherish that extraordinary gift of life.